On my way home, I received a call that made my hands shake. My 102-year-old father had been rushed to the emergency room. I immediately called my wife because she was supposed to be near him. She answered calmly and said she was already there and told me not to rush. But when I finally reached the hospital, the nurse looked at me with confusion and said something that stopped me cold. "You are the first family member who has come here." I knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. Later, I checked the security cameras and discovered what my wife had been hiding from me. My father was 102 years old, and even though he was still mentally strong, he depended on us for several things. I had always believed my wife cared about him because she often told me that she considered him like her own father. That was why the phone call that afternoon shocked me so much. I was driving home when my phone rang. It was the hospital. The voice on the other end told me that my father had been brought into the emergency room and that I needed to come as soon as possible. My heart dropped. I immediately called my wife. She answered after several rings. I asked her where she was. She sounded completely calm. She told me she was already at the hospital and said there was no reason for me to rush because the doctors were taking care of everything. I trusted her, but something about her voice did not feel right. When I arrived at the emergency department, I rushed to the reception desk and gave my father's name. The nurse looked at the computer and then looked directly at me. She asked if I was his son. I said yes. Then she said something I will never forget. "You are the first family member who has arrived." I thought I had misunderstood her. I told her my wife was already there. The nurse shook her head and said she had not seen anyone from my family. I immediately called my wife again. This time she did not answer. I found my father lying in a hospital bed. He was weak but conscious. When he saw me, he reached for my hand. He whispered that he thought I was never coming. Those words broke something inside me. I asked him what had happened. He told me he had been feeling weak for hours and had tried to get help. He said he had been told that I was busy and should not be disturbed. I knew that was not true. I had never told anyone to ignore my father. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. My father asked me why my wife had told him that I did not want to visit him anymore. I could barely speak. I started thinking about the strange things that had happened during the previous few months. My wife had started controlling my father's appointments. She had told me that he was becoming difficult. She had also started saying that he needed too much attention and that I was becoming obsessed with his care. I had believed her because I trusted my wife, but now I was beginning to question everything. After my father was stabilized, I asked the hospital staff whether they had any information about who brought him there. They told me that the circumstances would be documented and that the medical team would speak with me about his condition. That night I went home and checked the security cameras around our house. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then I checked the recordings from the previous few days. What I saw made my stomach turn. There were several moments when my father had been left alone for long periods despite needing assistance. I also saw my wife taking calls and repeatedly telling people that I was not available. Then I saw something that changed everything. My wife had been telling other people that my father was too old to make decisions for himself and that she would eventually handle everything for him. I immediately started reviewing every document and every message connected to his care. The more I discovered, the more I realized that this was not simply a misunderstanding. My father had been isolated from me. I had been kept away from important information, and my wife had been presenting herself as the person responsible for everything. But she had made one huge mistake. She underestimated how much my father still remembered. When I returned to the hospital the next morning, I sat beside him and asked him to tell me the truth. He looked at me and said he had been afraid to tell me because he did not want to destroy my marriage. Then he finally told me what he had been hiding.